On the day of our divorce, I used most of my dowry to beg to take one child with me. My eldest son looked at me coldly. I am father's legitimate son. I cannot leave with you, mother. My daughter pouted and hid behind my concubine sister. I don't want to. Aunt Jiang is my mother. I don't know you. My husband shook his head and sneered. Look how much of a failure you are. Neither of your children is willing to recognize you. Heartbroken, I bought 2 children from a slave trader. The older boy was quiet and steady, while the younger girl was rather willful, claiming every day that she was a princess. I just smiled and didn't take it seriously. I never imagined that a few years later, real palace servants would come to my door, saying that I had rendered meritorious service in raising the crown prince and princess, and that the emperor wished to confer upon me the title of Lady Jingwa. An eunuch bowed obsequiously and held out a peacock-white jade hairpin. I recognized it immediately. It was the one I had given to Jinnah. Jinnah was delicate. She had despised wooden hairpins as crude and golden ones as tacky, preferring to go with disheveled hair rather than wear them. Helpless, I had no choice but to spend a fortune on this hairpin. I let out a sigh of relief. I had been searching for the children for days since they went missing. Thankfully, everything was all right. Eunuch Huang's smile widened. Madam is kind-hearted. The emperor remembers your kindness and invites you to enter the palace. On the way, Eunuch Huang told me about the 2 children's past. As he spoke, a smile crept onto my face too. After leaving the Marquis's mansion, I had been in a slump for quite some time. Only these 2 children had given me hope and joy. To tell the truth, I had originally planned to buy just one to comfort myself. Wenli had a calm temperament, eerily similar to my eldest son, and I had taken a fancy to him at first sight, but he had clung to a little sister, glaring at me fiercely as if everyone were an enemy. The slave trader had deliberately blocked her view. She's a bit muddled, but it's nothing serious. Buy one, get one free, buy one, get one free. In the end, I took both. Afraid that I would abandon Jinnah, Wenli had been extremely diligent, eating little and vying to do all the work. I knew the child must have endured great hardships outside. My heart ached for him, so I not only refused to let him work but also hired a tutor to teach him to read. Naturally, I had never abandoned Jinnah. Though willful, she was not unreasonable. As I got along with her wholeheartedly, I discovered that she was also soft-hearted beneath her tough exterior. Gradually, the 2 children became much more at ease around me. Jinnah no longer acted aggressively, and Wenli even occasionally made jokes. I instructed them in every detail, and finally added a few special reminders. Jinnah loves sweet things, which are bad for her teeth. You must not indulge her too much. And as for Wenli, he's thoughtful. You can't tell from his face what he likes or dislikes. You must observe him carefully. If he frowns, he definitely doesn't like something. After speaking, I realized I had probably been redundant. He was a prince. Those people would be even more attentive than I was. I smiled awkwardly. But Eunuch Huang acted as if he hadn't noticed, taking careful notes. This servant will keep Madam's words firmly in mind. Upon entering the palace, I indeed saw Wenli and Jinnah dressed in magnificent silk robes. Especially Jinnah, she rushed over like a little bird, clinging to my arm and calling me mother affectionately. Wenli's dark eyes sparkled too. He performed a proper bow and softly called, "Mother." They had changed a great deal, exuding a natural dignity. Every gesture and movement showing nobility. Their complexions were ruddy, indicating they had been living well. I felt relieved. I had heard that the palace was full of intrigue and had worried they might have suffered grievances. I stayed in the palace and gradually learned more about the 2 children's story. It turned out that years ago, when the noble concubine had quarreled with the emperor at the imperial villa, she had fled with her children. Unfortunately, she had not only lost her own life but also left the prince and princess stranded outside the palace. The emperor had intended to confer upon me the title of concubine so that I could take care of the 2 children. I refused. He did not press me, sighing instead and deciding to make me Lady Jingwa, granting me the first-rank official title. Wenli and Jinna were growing up and had been busy since returning to the palace. After staying for some time, I wanted to leave the palace. My mansion was not yet built, so I bought a house to live in temporarily. As we passed the Anning Marquis's mansion, I fell into a daze. Looking at the carriages coming and going at the gate, I asked the coachman softly, "The Marquis's mansion seems very lively today." The coachman craned his neck to look, then smiled. "That was the Qin family's carriage that just left. I heard the Anning Marquis's mansion is discussing a marriage alliance with the Qin family." I froze, deep in thought. The Qin family was the noble concubine's maternal family and also Wenli and Jinna's maternal uncle's family. After entering the palace, I had heard Wenli mention that the noble concubine had always had a strained relationship with her natal family. Back when she was outside the palace, she had even been plotted against by her sisters. Now that Wenli had returned to the palace, the Qin family was sure to be purged. Thinking of this, a look of worry crossed my face, judging by age. This marriage was most likely for my eldest son. Noticing my expression, the coachman asked cautiously, "Does Madam know them? Shall we go in and take a look?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The gate servants did not recognize me, but seeing that I was dressed elegantly, they asked a few polite questions and ushered me in. Everything I saw was no longer as it used to be. The weeping willows by the side gate were gone, replaced by crabapple trees. Even the small pond beside the willows had been filled in, and a swing frame had been hung there. I withdrew my gaze and followed the guiding maid to the side hall. When the Anning Marquis saw me, he was greatly surprised. Soon, his expression returned to calm, and a hint of arrogance crept in. "Wei Jiao, isn't it too late for you to regret now?" "Regret? Regret what?" He paced back and forth with his hands behind his back, his voice laced with inexplicable anger, his eyes reddening. "I waited for you for 2 years, but you never looked back. Now that Aining is about to get married, you come back. Are there such good things in the world where you can reap the rewards without effort? I'll tell you this, it's too late. I have already made Jianga my legal wife. Even if you come back, you can only be a concubine." I laughed. So that's what he thought. Years ago, I had been injured in an accident and had to recover for 3 years. When I returned, my concubine sister had become a noble concubine, born into a military general's family. I had no tolerance for such things. Unable to bear it, I had asked for a divorce. He had accused me of being jealous and angrily written the divorce papers. Now he pretended to be deeply affectionate. It was ridiculous. I shook my head and took a step back. "I came to ask if Aining is discussing a marriage with the Qin family." He froze, then nodded. "Yes, we are. Jianga has raised Aining well. He is intelligent and quick-witted. This Miss Qin is his own choice." I frowned, my tone filled with concern. "This marriage is inappropriate." As soon as the words left my mouth, my eldest son's angry voice came from the end of the corridor. "What does mother think is inappropriate?" The young man was dressed in an indigo robe, well-groomed and handsome. Slowly, his image overlapped with the cold child in my memory. "I am the legitimate eldest son of the Marquis's mansion. How could I leave with you, mother? It is common for men to have multiple wives and concubines. Why must you press father so hard? Without father, mother will probably have no good place to go." On the day of our divorce, I had used most of my dowry just to ask for one child. I had never imagined that neither would be willing to go with me. Suppressing the bitterness in my heart, I explained softly, "The noble concubine is gone, and the Qin family has long been disliked by the emperor. They will sooner or later get into trouble. I do not want them to implicate you." My eldest son raised his eyebrows, his gaze tinged with sarcasm. "So, mother even understands court affairs now." The Anning Marquis could no longer bear to watch, coughing lightly. "Women's trivial opinions." Since the 3rd prince and 4th princess returned, the Qin family's influence has been on the rise. There are even rumors that the emperor intends to make the third prince his heir. If we wait until then to ask for the marriage, it will be too late. The Qin family has finally relented. Don't meddle here." My eldest son snorted softly but did not reply. I knew he must have thought me shallow and ignorant of such matters, but they only knew part of the story, and I could not tell them the rest. I had no choice but to remain silent. In the end, the marriage between my eldest son and Miss Qin was settled. Moreover, citing the daughter's advanced age, the Qin family set the wedding date for 1 month later. I thought to myself, there must be sensible people in the Qin family. Knowing to marry their daughter off as soon as possible, a maid came to inform me while Jinnah was napping beside me. These days, she often left the palace to visit me, sometimes staying for most of the day. The maid spoke in a low voice, afraid of waking the princess. I sighed and waved her away. My eldest son's temperament was like his grandfather's, arrogant and proud, craving power and influence. He could even scheme with his own marriage. I should have known better. Saying more was useless. Jinnah rolled over and woke up, rubbing her eyes and yawning. She muttered, "I always sleep soundly by mother's side." I smiled and helped her put on her clothes. "You can call me that here, but you must be careful of your status outside. As a princess, calling me mother so casually would inevitably invite criticism, especially since I had not agreed to enter the palace as a concubine." She pouted. "Father hasn't issued the edict yet, mother. You still have time to consider." I laughed and shook my head. Jinnah did not stay long before being summoned back to the palace by the servants. I saw her off to the carriage, watching it drive away, rubbing my brows. I planned to go take a nap, but just as I turned around, I heard a cold voice calling, "Mother." It was my eldest son. His gaze glanced briefly at the departing carriage before returning to me, lingering not a moment longer. "I came today to tell Mother that my wedding with Miss Qin is set for the first day of next month. Although you and Father have long been divorced, you are still my birth mother. If you wish to come, you may attend the ceremony as a relative." He stood tall and slender, his figure clear and cold, his gaze showing no joy or sorrow, as if he were looking at an irrelevant stranger. I lowered my eyes, my heart filled with complex emotions. My eldest son's temperament had shown signs of this since childhood. He disliked being close to me, unwilling to be said to be raised by a woman. He judged the situation carefully, analyzing the pros and cons of everything. Even on the day of our divorce, he had calmly analyzed my options for me. When I decided to leave, he had coldly replied to his father's question of why he refused to go with me. "Mother is useless to me." A faint pain spread in my heart. After a long while, I heard my own voice, "We'll see." Not hearing a definite answer, a trace of surprise flashed across his face, but he said nothing, turning around and mounting his horse to leave. Later, no one from the Marquis's mansion came to see me again. Only Wenli and the princess visited twice. Wenli had grown much taller. His face looked haggard, yet his spirit was vibrant. He stared at me, his tone grave. "Miss Qin is pregnant with the second prince's child." I stumbled, nearly falling over. I still went back to the Marquis's mansion. The Anning Marquis appeared out of nowhere, sneering sarcastically. "I thought you were truly backboneful, so you've come back after all. What a pity. The wedding ceremony is already over. There's nothing for you here." My eldest son stood beside him, glancing at me without surprise, his voice flat. "I told you she'd come." Playing hard to get, retreating to advance, these tricks are common enough. Why get so worked up, father? Ignoring them, I headed straight for the bridal chamber. After a few turns, I came face to face with Miss Qin, supported by the matchmaker, unannoyed at being stopped. She only asked what I wanted. I waved my hand, and the female physician stepped forward to feel her pulse. Only then did she freeze, stepping back in shock. "Madam, what are you trying to do?" She stepped back too hastily, slipping and crashing into the rockery behind her. Her wedding veil fell off, revealing a panicked yet delicate face. At that moment, The Anning Marquis and my eldest son caught up from behind, their eyes instantly blazing with anger. "What are you doing?" My eldest son helped her up, his expression dark and menacing. "Do you really hate seeing me happy that much? First you said the marriage was inappropriate and tried to stop it. Now you're bullying my wife. Will this never end?" He closed his eyes in annoyance. "The Marquis's mansion does not welcome you. Madam, please leave." "Madam," he couldn't even bring himself to call me mother anymore. I hesitated for a moment, turning to Miss Cheen to speak, when suddenly hurried footsteps approached. The steward ran in, flustered. "Master, it's a disaster. I heard the Imperial Guards have surrounded the Cheen family and are about to seize their property." My eldest son's eyes widened in disbelief, his gaze snapping to me instantly, and I happened to see the look of relief on Miss Cheen's face. I suddenly understood she had come prepared. My eldest son strode up to me, staring at me intensely. "Mother, did you know this would happen all along?" I closed my eyes slightly. "I warned you." His gaze was scorching, as if he would bore a hole through me. Grinding his teeth, he pointed sharply at Miss Cheen. "Check her pulse." Naturally, the result was unsatisfactory. Miss Cheen was pregnant, nearly 3 months along. My eldest son flew into a rage, wanting to kick her, but the matchmaker stopped him. Miss Cheen's gaze swept past me. She calmly adjusted her phoenix crown, smiling half-mockingly. "Marquis, heir, shall we talk?" I didn't know what they said, but when they returned, the Anning Marquis's face was as dark as thunder, and my eldest son's expression was even more somber. In the study, my eldest son leaned one hand on the desk, the veins on the back of his hand bulging, his voice low. "How did you know all this? Mother, if you knew, why didn't you tell me earlier?" I turned my head away. "I overheard it by chance. I wasn't sure if it was true, so I could only remind you a little." Regarding the Cheen family, Wenli had long been planning. I didn't want to say more and ruin his plan. He stared at me for a moment longer before straightening up with a sneer. "Of course. You've been in the countryside for years, how could you understand these things?" He then turned to the Anning Marquis, sighing deeply. "Very well, since we've boarded the second prince's bandwagon, we have no choice. If he really ascends the throne, we'll at least have the merit of supporting the new emperor." The Anning Marquis still looked stern. "It's just unfair to you, becoming a father to someone else's child right after marriage." Only then did I realize the second prince had long been scheming against the Anning Marquis's mansion. Knowing the Cheen family's downfall was inevitable, he had deliberately found a fool to be the father of his child. From their words, they intended to tie themselves completely to the second prince, thinking they would stand against Wenli. My heart tightened with anxiety. I hurried to say, "Didn't you say the third prince is gaining momentum and is likely to be made crown prince?" "How could you? The third prince is too high to reach, but the second prince is within our grasp. Besides, what other options do we have now?" The Anning Marquis paced restlessly as he explained. I understood at once, the second prince must hold some leverage over the Marquis's mansion. After a moment of silence, I suddenly spoke. "If I said I could find a way, that's enough." My eldest son interrupted me impatiently. "What could you possibly do? Stop meddling here. Also, Mother, you'd better not spread word of today's incident, otherwise, beware of the second prince's methods. You'd better think carefully." With that, he ignored me and stormed off with a wave of his sleeves. It was already dark when I returned. After thinking for a while, I still had someone deliver a letter to Wenli. The second prince was not to be underestimated if he could get leverage over the Anning Marquis. Though Wenli was steady, he was still young. I worried he might suffer a loss. After that, I never went to the Marquis's mansion again. Only sporadic news reached me, saying the heir was noble and righteous, not blaming Miss Cheen at all for the Cheen family's downfall. Instead, he doted on her extremely, and before long, she was pregnant again. I sighed silently. I had done my best, everything I could. What happened next was beyond my control. Jinna must have sensed I was in a bad mood, as she came to see me often these days. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes new gadgets to amuse me. Today, she dragged me along to go shopping. The treasure pavilion had new arrivals, and it was crowded with people. Jinna, wearing a veil, pulled me around to choose things. I was worried about being recognized, but seeing how excited she was, I let her have her way. Despite being careful, we still ran into acquaintances as we left. Miss Chin let out a cry, clutching her belly and leaning against the doorframe. The maid beside her shouted insults at Jinna. Where did this girl come from, being so reckless? If anything happens to my lady, can you afford it? I frowned slightly. It was clearly Miss Chin who had collided with us first, yet she wanted to blame Jinna. My eldest son appeared out of nowhere, supporting Miss Chin with concern. Are you all right? He then looked up, about to scold, when his gaze froze as he saw me. It's you, unwilling to get entangled. I pulled Jinna and tried to leave, but just as I stepped forward, I heard a shriek. Insolent. You hit me and still want to run. Someone, seize her. With that, several old women surrounded us. I shielded Jinna behind me, frowning. Madam, it was clearly you who bumped into us first. Don't be unreasonable. I had heard Miss Chin was arrogant and tyrannical, and it was true. My eldest son's gaze fell on Jinna, his voice flat. This is the daughter you raised in the countryside. She's utterly rude. Here's what, for your sake, let this girl kneel and kowtow to apologize, and this matter will be dropped. He looked down at Jinna condescendingly, as if granting a great mercy. Miss Chin glared angrily but reluctantly agreed. I almost laughed. Though my eldest son had been cold-hearted in the past, he had at least had a sense of justice. Now he was bullying a girl who hadn't even reached marriageable age. But even when I was down on my luck, I refused to let Jinna be wronged. Now, how could I possibly make her kneel and apologize to them? It was absurd. I spat out 2 cold words. Dream on. Miss Chin grew even angrier, no longer holding back. She waved her hand, and the old women moved to grab Jinna. I stood my ground, shielding Jinna, and watched silently. Sure enough, as soon as one of them reached out, she flew backward like a broken kite. In an instant, several servants and old women fell to the ground, screaming in pain. Before I knew it, a line of shadow guards knelt before Jinna and me, bowing respectfully. We are late. Madam, forgive us, Your Highness the Princess. The Emperor had sent hidden guards to protect me. Oddly enough, this was the first time they had appeared. Miss Chin stepped back in alarm, staring at us in disbelief. Princess, you're saying this girl is a princess? My eldest son also turned pale, as if realizing something. His gaze darted back and forth between Jinna and me, his voice trembling slightly. She's a princess. Then who are you, mother? Jinna timely pulled off her veil, rushed to my side, and giggled. Mother, their expressions are so funny. Mother. My eldest son's eyes widened. Seemingly finally confirming something, he stared at me, forcing out the words with difficulty. You are Lady Jingwa. I stroked Jinna's long hair, not answering. Though the imperial edict hadn't been issued yet, the title of Lady Jingwa had long spread. Jinna had returned to the palace hours ago, yet my eldest son still stood in my courtyard. I sighed and let him come in anyway. He pressed his lips together, staring at me stubbornly. His eyes showed disappointment, anger, and even a hint of faint grievance, completely different from his usual aloof and self-possessed demeanor. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you're the adoptive mother of the 3rd prince and 4th princess? Mother, these past few days, watching us make fools of ourselves, you must have found it amusing, didn't you? I closed my eyes, not answering. I had clearly said everything I needed to. They just hadn't believed me. Mother, do you know that today at the Treasure Pavilion, Miss Chin was choosing a gift for Lady Jingwa's banquet at the end of the month? I nodded. I knew. I had heard her conversation with her maid. At the end of the month, the Emperor would issue an edict conferring upon me the first-rank official title of Lady Jingwa. and personally host a banquet to announce to the world my meritorious service in raising the third prince and fourth princess. Noble families had long received the news and begun preparing gifts. It was also for this reason that I hadn't stopped Jinnah, letting her accompany me shopping. Seeing me remain silent, my eldest son's face showed embarrassment and anger. I remind you not to be too happy too soon. The third prince isn't crown prince yet. It's still unclear who will win. Since it became known that I lived in Shisi Hutong, many people had sent invitations to visit, but I had refused them all. The third prince was already too prominent, and I didn't want to bring him trouble. It wasn't until the palace banquet at the end of the month that I appeared. The hall was adorned with resplendent silk and bright lanterns. Jinnah accompanied me, as my adopted daughter. For the first time, everyone looked at me with mixed expressions. Naturally, some recognized me as the former Anning Marquis's wife. The Anning Marquis's face turned red and white under their stares. My concubine sister's expression was even worse, her hand tightening unconsciously around her daughter's. I silently watched the daughter I had once doted on. This was the first time I had seen her since my return. She had been too young when I left to remember me, which was understandable. It seemed my concubine sister treated her well. A twinge of sadness hit me, but I also felt a sense of relief. After the imperial edict was issued, my eldest son came to pay his respects, seeing the princess standing beside me. His dark eyes fixed on me, filled with a hint of unwillingness. Jinnah tilted her head, snickering softly. If mother hadn't divorced father, you might have been my elder brother. You know, my eldest son's breath hitched, his fists clenching tightly. When I went out to freshen up, I ran into the Anning Marquis. He seemed to have been waiting for me. He looked much haggard than I remembered. His eyes stared straight at me, filled with an inexplicable sense of loss. Wei Jiao, are you truly unwilling to return to the Marquis's mansion? What if I demote Jianga to concubine and relegate you as my legal wife? I found it absurd. Where was this sudden deep affection coming from? He thought for a moment, then lowered his voice, his expression complex. The second prince is not as simple as you think. The third prince may not win either. Jiao, the struggle for the crown prince is no trivial matter. Think carefully. My eyes flickered, and I half closed them. The banquet was halfway over, and the emperor hadn't appeared. I suspected the Anning Marquis knew something. Soon, I got my answer. Eunuch Huang secretly led me to the Qianqing palace. The emperor, who had always been strong, looked as if he had been gravely ill, lying weakly on the bed. Beside him were several blood-stained handkerchiefs. My pupils contracted, and I couldn't help stepping back. He waved his hand, gesturing for me to approach, opening his mouth. His first words were, "Wenli is missing." I trembled violently, accidentally knocking over the teacup on the table. Tea splashed everywhere, but I didn't care about my wet sleeves. Rushing forward, how could this happen? He sighed deeply, his voice filled with pain and helplessness. I never thought the second prince would be willing to do anything for the throne. He then turned to me, his eyes deep and meaningful. "Lady Jingwa, when you took your brother's place on the battlefield, I let it slide. Now that Wenli is in danger, would you be willing to put on your military uniform again and save him?" I looked up sharply, staring at him in disbelief. So he had known all along. I was still in a daze when I left. A flood of information swirled in my mind, overwhelming me. It turned out the second prince knew the emperor would never make him crown prince, so he had long been plotting a rebellion in secret. He had rallied many people to his side, including my father and brother, whom he had blackmailed into serving him. While suppressing bandits, Wenli had been ambushed and injured, and his whereabouts were still unknown. The second prince had sent men to assassinate him while attempting to force the emperor to abdicate. My brother's 100,000 troops were his insurance. I took a deep breath, but few knew that my brother's military achievements had actually been earned by me. Even during the 3 years I was recovering from my injury, I had continued to fight in his place and recover on his behalf. This matter was too important. I hadn't even told the Anning Marquis or my eldest son. I've long known about you and your brother, the Emperor had said. Your brother is mediocre but not reckless. I chose to turn a blind eye, but this time, he dared to secretly defect to the second prince. Wei Jiao, if you handle this well, I will not only overlook your brother's substitution but also leniently punish the general's mansion. The choice is yours. The emperor's words still echoed in my ears. What could I do? Of course, I had to save Wenli. He was my child. I couldn't stand by and watch him die. I left the palace before the banquet ended. I pushed several batches of fast horses to exhaustion, finally arriving in Jiangju before sunset the next day. After thinking for a moment, I first sought out several trusted confidants, deciding to replace my brother and act first without waiting for orders. We had looked alike since childhood, and pretending to be him came naturally to me. My brother was still dazed when he woke up in the secret room. Seeing me, he flew into a rage. Wei Jiao, are you crazy? There's no war right now. Who told you to pretend to be me? I smiled faintly. Who says there's no war? Didn't you, brother, fly into a rage for the sake of a beauty and plan to help the second prince rebel? He froze, his face instantly turning ugly. You don't understand, don't talk nonsense. I had long heard about my brother's romantic escapades from my confidants. The second prince's so-called leverage was nothing more than holding his beloved woman hostage. Perhaps his military achievements had come too easily, and his life had been too comfortable. He was willing to do anything for a beautiful woman. I never knew he was such a romantic fool. Unfortunately, I had no intention of fulfilling his infatuation. I locked him in the secret room, entering and exiting the general's mansion in his guise. At the same time, I found out where Wenli was hiding. He was injured, being cared for by his confidants in a commoner's home. When I arrived, he was changing his dressing, his face turned pale at the sight of me, looking utterly despairing. Several guards blocked my path, assuming a posture of readiness to die heroically. It seemed he also knew the general's mansion had defected to the second prince. He thought I was my brother, come to kill him. I waved my hand, dismissing the men behind me, then walked up to him. Before the guards could act, I first pulled off my fake beard, smiling faintly. Ali, it's me. He froze, his dark eyes flickering. When he met my confirming gaze, his tense body suddenly relaxed, and his eyes reddened. My heart ached too. Wenli had always been strong, rarely showing weakness, but he was still just a teenager, facing life and death. How could he remain unaffected? He lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes trembling, and whispered, "Mother." The guards looked at each other, silently sheathing their swords and stepping back. Wenli said there was a traitor among his men, which was how he had ended up in this situation. He slowly recounted what had happened over the past few days. After a long while, he looked up, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Mother, coming to save me means betraying the general's mansion and opposing your father and brother. Is it worth it?" I knew what he meant. If the second prince won, both the general's mansion and the Anning Marquis's mansion would be my backers. I had no need to risk my life for him. I gently blew on the medicinal soup, holding it to his lips, just like I had when he was little. After watching him drink it, I said solemnly, "It's worth it." He was naturally intelligent, and had long guessed about my brother and me from my occasional words, yet he had never used it to his advantage. He had always cared about my feelings. How could I break his heart? When I returned to the general's mansion, my father had already come back. He couldn't be fooled by the commotion in the mansion. Seeing me, he shouted angrily, "Unfilial daughter." He felt sorry for his son being forced onto the wrong path, but he was also displeased with me opposing him. I didn't bother to argue, getting straight to the point and telling him what the emperor had said. I also subtly threatened him. My brother was in my hands, and I was the one who knew how to fight. I told him not to be foolish and mix up his priorities. Naturally. He was enraged. In the end, upon hearing that the emperor was willing to spare the general's mansion, he sighed, "Children are all debts, all debts." Once I had dealt with my father, things became much easier. Using my brother's identity, I contacted the second prince, quickly figuring out his plans. I learned he wanted me to lead the army into the capital in disguise in half a month to prepare for the coup. I wrote a letter to the palace, informing the emperor of the progress and reassuring him. After all the arrangements were made, I secretly left with a few men and returned to the capital. The second prince was about to stage a coup, and the palace would surely be dangerous. I was worried about Jinnah and decided to go back and check on her. As I expected, the harem was already under the control of concubine Rue, the second prince's birth mother. Although Jinnah hadn't been mistreated, she was confined every day and suffered silently. Concubine Rue didn't make things difficult for me when I appeared, easily allowing me to see Jinnah. After all, in her eyes, a woman from the inner chambers like me posed no threat. On the 8th day of the 10th lunar month, chaos broke out early in the morning. A group of imperial guards suddenly appeared inside and outside the palace gates, clashing with the palace guards.
"Your Highness is busy. I advise you to save your strength and write the edict." As soon as he finished speaking, the Anning Marquis's eyes lit up. He stepped forward quickly. "Your Highness, you're here." I looked up and indeed saw the second prince, followed by General Tong. When he noticed my gaze, he nodded subtly. I understood everything was ready. The second prince strode forward triumphantly, glanced around, and his eyes fell directly on the emperor's desk. Scanning it, he spoke dissatisfiedly. "Anning Marquis, how did you do things? Why hasn't father written a single word yet?" With a wave of his hand, more than a dozen soldiers rushed in, before anyone could react. The blades of their swords were pressed against our necks. The second prince sat down imposingly, speaking leisurely. "Come, father, tell me who should die first." The emperor was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood, pointing at him and cursing. "Bastard, how dare you?" The second prince picked his ear casually. "What don't I dare to do? The throne belongs to the capable. After all, it shouldn't always be given to whoever father favors." He looked up. His eyes landing on Jinnah's tense little face, he pointed casually. "Since that's the case, let's kill your favorite little daughter to liven things up." A pig-like scream echoed through the roof. The second prince stared in disbelief at his severed hand, grinding his teeth. "Who?" I raised my hand, pushing the blade away from my neck, and spoke casually. "Your Highness, long time no see." His eyes widened, and he looked me up and down in confusion. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in his head, and he reached for me with his other hand, screaming in terror. "It's you. It was you all along. Where is General Wei? How could it be you?" I crossed my arms, standing in front of him, watching his ugly demeanor with amusement. "Your Highness. Guess, could it be that the so-called General Wei who fought on the battlefield was never anyone but me?" "Impossible." 3 voices spoke at once. My gaze shifted from the second prince to the Anning Marquis, passing over his eyes, which were shaking with shock, and finally settled on my eldest son. He seemed to be greatly stimulated, his lips trembling in disbelief as he pointed at me. He tried to approach me, to ask for the truth, but the blade pressed against his neck stopped him. Before anyone knew it, the blades that had been pointing at us had long since turned, now pressing against theirs. After a long while, I heard the Anning Marquis's hoarse voice. "No wonder you had wounds on your body. You always said you got them accidentally. You never told me you had been on the battlefield." I fell silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "I had planned to tell you, when I returned after 3 years. I had intended to tell him the truth and had made up my mind to stop helping my brother, but I never expected that everything would have changed by then and there was no longer any need for me to speak up." My eldest son went crazy, pushing the blade aside and rushing at me, only to be restrained by the others. He looked deranged, filled with anger and hatred. "Mother, you lied to me. Why do you always lie to me? You obviously had connections, you obviously knew how to fight, you pretended to know nothing. Watching us be fooled by you, are you proud of yourself?" "Mother, I wanted to say I wasn't, I wanted to say I had tried my best to help them, but in the end, I said nothing. At this point, words were meaningless. The palace coup came to an end when Wenli returned. He had led his men to raid the second prince's strongholds outside the palace, seized the list of the second prince's faction, and confiscated millions of taels of gold and silver. The Anning Marquis's mansion was completely convicted of treason, its property seized and its members exiled. This sentence was lenient, granted by Wenli out of consideration for me. I never expected, however, that my eldest son would commit suicide in prison. He had always been arrogant and proud, unable to bear such suffering. When I heard the news, I fell silent for a long time, sighing deeply. Before leaving, my youngest daughter finally came to beg me, crying. She said she didn't want to go to Lingnan and begged me to take her in. I knew this was probably her father's idea, but I agreed anyway. The Marquis's mansion's crimes shouldn't be her burden, after all. We shared blood. I was willing to save her. Not long after, I heard that Miss Qin had died on the way to exile, taking the lives of both herself and her unborn child. The child in her belly was the second prince's blood. Wenli would never have let her live. I had long guessed this. The emperor's health was poor, and the court had long been in Wenli's hands. He was made crown prince, and after this upheaval, he became even more steady and mature, in addition to being Lady Jinghua. My title as General Zhenghua also spread. The emperor specially allowed me to return to the general's mansion and inherit the title of general. On the day I left, Wenli and Jinna came to see me off. Jinna's eyes were red from crying, unwilling to let me go. I smiled and patted her shoulder. My whole life, I had lived for others. Now, I wanted to try living for myself.